Today I look at a starter movie that struggles to get off the line. Hello and welcome to Rotted Review of the Day, and today I am taking a look at the 2019 movie My Soul to Keep, directed by Ajmal Zahir Ahmad. There's one reason in particular that I chose this movie. I was looking up reviews of it when I was deciding, what to watch. And first of all, I found that it seems to be somewhat polarizing. Some people love it, some people hate it, and it's often the case in situations like this. I found myself in a place kind of in between. But the reason I chose it was because one thing that people were saying about it fairly universally is that it's juvenile. Not in a bad way, but in a way that makes it, easily accessible to the younger generation. And I'm always on lookout for something like that. I get asked this quite a bit by friends and family of mine. They have children, they're growing up, they're still kind of at the stage where they might, get nightmares from watching a, full-blown horror film, but they want to introduce them into the genre, test their mettle, and see if it's something that they might like. And there's several entries in there that, if they ask me for a recommendation on that I'll throw out there. I think The Gate's a good one. It, has a silliness to it, not a whole lot of gore or anything else to it, and the protagonist is a young child, so that helps. So I'm always on the lookout for something like that, and I thought that maybe this might fit the bill. And here's the thing about that in particular, though. I found that this one was a difficult movie, insofar as the protagonist is a young child, and the tone of it is, it's confusing because it is juvenile. It does have a whimsical, childlike feel to it that I'll get into the aesthetic of in a little bit, but it also has some very dark adult moments in it that I think kind of puts it on this weird platform of being too juvenile for full-on horror movie lovers, but I think a little bit too challenging in its dark tones. And I don't mean blood and gore and nightmare material. I just mean that without giving anything away, without giving any kind of spoilers, this has some pretty darn difficult topics that it tackles, especially towards the end, that I don't know if the younger generation will really appreciate. This is the kind of thing that would take some conversations after the fact, I believe, between parents and their kids, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but if you're expecting it to stay whimsical and lighthearted all the way throughout, think again. And there are times in which I appreciate that. The summer of '84, that left turn that it took, I loved. Just the tonal shift there. If you watch my review on that, it's one of the best things about it. And in this case, I don't know if I necessarily rally behind it to that degree. First of all, I think that there's a difference between having an adolescent-based movie that is for all audiences that takes that sharp left turn into straight-on terrible, difficult to watch levels of now we're really getting into horror. And I think that having that kind of dichotomy in summer of '84 worked really well for it. But there's a difference between that and actually having a movie that seems to be geared towards a younger generation, towards, I would say, anywhere between 8 and 11 years old. When you have something like that that's geared towards that and it takes that massive of a tonal shift, I think it can be jarring and not necessarily outright scary, but darn disturbing. And I'm all for challenging the mental, emotional state of children in an attempt to always get them challenging the world around them and challenging themselves and being more introspective. But I think that there is a limit. And this might start encroaching on that, especially if you aren't quite sure what to make of it. I think that maybe for parents, this might be one to at least watch ahead of time and decide for yourselves whether or not your child can handle this one. or if maybe they can handle it, but you are going to set, a half-hour block aside to actually have an engaged conversation with them, which I do encourage. I mean, regardless of the situation, talk to your kids. It's always a good thing. But another thing about this movie that I was going to mention was the aesthetic. Well, first of all, you know what? I'm going to get into the plot of this one. This mainly follows the character of Eli, who I think is 9 years old, and he sets out, right? I mean, the movie starts out straight away with him at a show and tell class, and he's showing this dark, ghoulish picture that he drew. And he says that this is the monster that comes and visits me at night, and he's terribly scared of it, and he knows what it's called. It's evil, and the evil has a name, and it is the Burgley monster. And he says, it's there to take my soul, and I think it's out for everybody else too. So if it does get my soul, if you notice that I'm not at school one day, watch out for yourselves. And obviously this scares the pants off of some of the kids, and he gets called into the counselor's office, and the parents get called for a teacher conference, and blah, blah, blah. And then it kind of goes into the rest of the movie where Eli is then teamed up with his best friend Sam and kind of navigates the familial structure of, always getting into trouble and his evil sister and so on and so forth, while also working with Sam to try and determine if the Burgley monster is actually real, or at least proving it, and then how to overcome it. So one thing this movie does is, going back to the aesthetic here, is it employs some unique aesthetic choices as far as the characters go. I'm trying to find a way to phrase this properly. It's a little difficult, honestly. There's been a lot of callbacks. There's been a lot of movies and TV shows that are trying to take films from the 80s and capture that lightning in a bottle. Where I'm talking, the Goonies, E.T., so on and so forth, where it has children that are put into adult situations, and the magical, friendships and so forth that are formed or are cemented throughout the course of that as also a kind of coming of age thing. Those absolutely are iconic, and capturing that spirit, I think, is a difficult thing. And I've always been waiting for the shoe to drop, to be perfectly honest. I always keep an open mind, and I allow for a movie to surprise me, but I've always been waiting for the shoe to drop. When I saw the trailer to the first season of Stranger Things, I was thinking, oh, geez, what are they doing? And then I watched it, and I loved it. Okay, that worked. Summer of '84, kind of the same thing. I thought that the nature of having a group of friends and then setting it in the 80s and then having this mystery that unfolds and so forth, I thought, oh, geez, here we go. But it actually managed to surprise me on that front, too. Not as good as Stranger Things, but still good in its own right. This one, I think the shoe dropped. I think that we finally went a little bit too far, or at the very least, it didn't succeed to the intent that they wanted. This movie is actually set in the present day, but it employs some of that whimsy that you can tell that they had a lot of inspiration from those callback movies. Even going so far as to have odd character choices, stuff that, I'll stretch my suspension of disbelief and so forth to allow it, but it still seemed a little bit out of place. The main character of Eli, 9 years old in present day terms, and he's wearing an old school 80s Duke G.I. Joe t-shirt, and he's playing with old school Transformers. Things like that. It just seems a little bit odd. But putting that aside, this also has the kind of, score and soundtrack that elicits that feeling of, they're going on an adventure and so on. And the whole best friends relationship there. It had that look and feel of somebody that was trying so desperately to capture this lightning in a bottle once again. And I think it just kind of fizzled out. It really didn't work for me. The plot and the aesthetic and so forth, I've honestly been really struggling with how to approach this in this review, because finding the words for this, ironically, as it seems, is difficult. And I think that's ultimately where this movie kind of came from, is finding its own words was difficult. This really reminded me, if you've ever had a conversation with a young child, it really reminded me, the entire movie, as far as the plot, the characters, the tone, the aesthetic, of a child that's trying to tell you a story, and you can see in their eyes the double layer there of one layer, you can see the absolute clarity of what they're trying to get across, and then the absolute lack of vocabulary to properly convey that with the words they're trying to speak, and the frustration that, when those two levels meet. And I saw that throughout this movie. I saw what it was, that it had clarity for what it was trying to get across, both aesthetically and storyline-wise and character-wise, but it lacked the vocabulary, it lacked the talent, it lacked the interest to really bring it home. And there was a lot of, I don't know, I still to this time, at this moment, I don't know exactly what it was trying to say with its characters and with its conflict. It just seemed to get a little lost. And in the end, I wound up in a place where I finished watching it, and I really just didn't know what to make of it. I'm going to go ahead and throw up all the scores here. As always, 4 different categories, each one worth up to 25 points for a total possible score of 100 points. And the plot, I thought it was okay. Towards the end, I think that the end is really kind of where the polarization is really going to come into play. Because, like I said, not to compare it always to the Summer of '84, but Summer of '84, it had a bit of that meandering quality to it, but the end really just brought it home. And whatever sins the previous, hour had, that really forgave a lot of them. And in this case, I don't know if the ending would do that. I think the ending of this one is where the polarization comes from, and if you didn't like the ending or had difficulty with it, I don't think that, even if you enjoyed it, I don't know if it saves the sins of the previous hour. So much of the plot was reliant upon the Eli character and the decisions that he made, as well as his relationship with the Sam character. And the difficulty with that is all of it really felt kind of artificial. Capturing that whole 80s vibe and that, that group juvenile coming of age kind of adventure vibe, it didn't really work. It didn't feel natural. Even the relationship between Eli and Sam, the dialogue between them, it didn't feel natural. It felt artificial, and so much of the plot was reliant on that I think that affected the score greatly. As I was watching the movie, I just wasn't really attached to anybody or any situation in there. As far as the intent goes, that kind of speaks for itself. I think, I've already said what I think it was trying to achieve, and I just don't think it really hit the mark well. The acting, I thought, was average. There were some good performances in here, most notably by the main character, Eli, played by Parker Smerrick. And everybody else just kind of, I don't know whether it was the way the dialogue was written, I don't know whether it was the way the delivery was directed, or I don't know if it was the performances themselves, but that artificial feel is very much the fault of how the characters interacted with one another. So as far as the acting performances go, I really couldn't give it all weighed together above a pretty average score of 13. And the technical, credit where credit's due. This is a beautiful movie. This was shot very well. The camera work and the cinematography was spot on. This was very, very polished. And I have no issue giving it high marks where it deserves it. And in the technical category, it absolutely does deserve it. So I'm happy to give it some points there. I do try to remain neutral and open-minded, and this is one where it deserves some kudos. So kudos to you for the technical abilities of My Soul to Keep. And that gives us a total score of 49 out of 100 points. Would I recommend this movie? Unless you're showing it to a younger generation, I don't think that it's going to be all that enjoyable. I think that there's a whole lot of better entries out there. And if you are going to show it to a younger generation, again, there are better entries out there. But would I dissuade anybody from watching this? I think I'm going to just fall back on my previous statement. I think watch it for yourself. I think that determine it for yourself. You know your child, I would hope, and you know their sensibilities, and watch it for yourself, weigh in on it, discuss it with your partner, and maybe set some time aside to have a conversation afterward if you do decide to show it to them. Otherwise, I really do think that there's a lot better entries out there in this category, but this is the most modern. This is the newest release, and I think it's going to be on the tip of everybody's tongues. So at the very least, I wanted to do a review and weigh in on that. So that should about do it. That's my review of 2019's My Soul to Keep. I really thank you for joining me here today. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. If you like this video, please click like and subscribe. And if you want to support me further, my Patreon link is below. Remember, next time you want to watch a horror movie, first make sure that it's good and rotted.